my fellow Americans, are we reaping our harvest of greed? Have we built our house on sinking sand? Why are we being ugly Americans?
Good morning, this is CJ Holmes, founder of Homeowners for Justice and your host today for Weekdays Live. And boy, do we have a whole bunch of no news. Last week, virtually everything was dominated by the Boston bombing. And a lot of people have been saying, oh, it's a false flag event. And we're going to, we address that and we're going to talk a little bit about that. You have to decide that for yourself. But what I do know for sure is that a whole bunch of stuff, really important news items, were not talked about. Were we distracted? Absolutely. Is that the point? You decide. So truly, I want to point out to you more signs and verification that this is a real estate bubble. It is a time to sell if you want to sell. It may not be the time to buy. You have to decide those things. I may be able to help you, sort of sort that out for yourself. But there have been so many other things happening. Congressman calling for suspending the Constitution for the Boston bombers. The OCC, another revolving door. Oh my goodness. The torture investigation came out. This is bipartisan review. The Arkansas had a huge oil spill. Did you know that Exxon had an oil spill in Arkansas? I didn't. I do now. Insider trading limits were removed in Congress. And of course, the U.S. government has actually put in writing that Doc X, which is going in for sentencing tomorrow, did no harm. There's a lot of outrage amongst folks like us about that. And then, of course, the highlight of today, and I'm going to play a couple of segments of the Senate Banking Committee so that you can hear it for yourselves. The OCC and the Independent Foreclosure Review, fictitious accounting on behalf of the banks. And then definitely, as I have even experienced, the more I find out about this, the more I'm looking to the new paradigm. How can we fix this for ourselves? What other technologies? How can we really go green? How can we support ourselves? And I'm going to bring to your attention aquaponics. It's pretty exciting. So let's start with the real estate bubble. Sorry, guys, it is truly a bubble. Wall Street is betting billions on the single-family homes, and of course, that's a distressed market. In fact, just today, this morning, in our paper in Sonoma County, they actually talked about it. I can hardly believe it. They're talking about homeless shelters and how they now have a waiting list in Sonoma County, and they cannot meet the demand. And in the article, they talked about 50,000 homeowners, families, displaced by foreclosures. And yet that's all they said. It was like, well, that's just the way it is. All these people, they've lost their homes. And of course, they get rentals as if, they had money for that. And so the people that are suffering in the homeless shelters are the poorer people. And that may very well be true in many cases, but I know for a fact, I've got a friend who teaches school, and many of her children in 3rd grade are living in homeless shelters because they were foreclosed. So even in your local articles, there's an attempt, in my opinion, to cover up this horrific crisis on the family and on the middle class. And so, of course, it's really great. You see the Wall Street betting billions. And what I did like about this is that in the first paragraph of this article, it said big investors are pouring unprecedented amounts of money into the real estate hard hit by housing crash. Yeah, no kidding. Bringing those moribund markets back to life. But like I've been saying, watch out. But raising the prospect of another Wall Street fueled bubble that won't be sustainable. And I've been saying this. So if you're looking at buying or looking at investing in real estate, I'd really recommend that you seriously consider how will you feel if you pay X for it and then by the end of the year it's worth 3/4 X or half X. Think about that, okay? Just protect yourself as you can. And here's another comment. Here's another article. California prices. We see this all the time. It's like boom, bust. And so now, literally in 1 month, we've seen prices, home prices, soar 8.3%. I've watched median in just my county soar $75,000 from 325 to 400,000. That's median. And how does that compare to the past bubble? Well, it still looks like a good deal. But the trouble is, you have to understand what is fueling this bubble. And if it were homeowners and occupants with normal loans, we would have hit stabilization. We would be confident that they would stay in those houses for 30 years. But when they're investors and they're using cash, then we know that if and when they change their mind, they're going to start dumping those things, and that could actually push prices down extra low. We could have another collapse rather than just a sliding down of the prices. Just read these articles and pay attention, please. And share with your family and friends. Okay. And of course, oh my goodness, and I know this as a broker because I get in my email all of these articles and solicitations for lenders. And their, stated income is back. They don't call it the same, like it says. Arcane names are hiding big risk. But the banks that created the risky amalgams of mortgages and loans, they didn't want to say wrote toxic bad loans, but that's exactly what they did. The kind that went so wrong during the bust. They're busily reviving the same type of investments that many thought were gone for good. No, they're not. And this is the point. The banks will continue to do this until we stop them. Please understand that and help me. I know you are. But any other ideas you have that we can do as the people to stop the banks, to stop the foreclosures, to stop this kind of lending? We really need to shift to the new paradigm, new borrowing ideas, like public banking and funding for home loans that are not securitized. So, of course, now we're starting to hear from our new Treasury Secretary, Secretary of the Treasury, they call him Jacob Lew. And of course, he's saying we need to boost global demand. Yes, because only when this last credit bubble is expanding will it not explode and implode. And so we can expect that at some point in time it's going to implode. Sorry, guys. And now we have him saying, no reason to worry about a bubble. No, there's no reason to worry about a bubble. With stocks at all-time highs and only tepid economic growth, there's little sign of a bubble forming in markets. That's what he said. Okay, you have to understand, guys, when these guys say stuff like this, you have to start using your common sense. Does that make sense? If that doesn't make sense, then tell yourself it doesn't make sense and don't pay attention to what they say, because this is what government officials do. They keep preaching the line until it blows up.
Is there any concern at all that when we hit record highs, given the level of growth that's out there, that there could be a bubble being formed?
Analysis I've seen doesn't give me a reason to be worried right now. I think one of the lessons we learned from 2008, 2009 is that even when things are not a problem, we always have to ask those questions. We need to make sure that we have the transparency to see what's going on in firms, in markets. We need to have the regulatory tools to deal with problems as they develop. That doesn't mean we should jump in when we don't see a problem.
He doesn't see a problem. Gee, what about the $9 trillion that are off balance sheet on the Federal Reserve? What about the hundreds of trillions of quadrillions of dollars of derivatives that are off balance sheets on the banks? What about the bubble in the real estate market? But he doesn't see a problem. And never forget, he's now Secretary of the Treasury. And guess who runs the black budget? Remember what we saw last week? The Secretary of the Treasury runs the black budget. So there's no problem for him because he's in charge of, unknown trillions of dollars with access to the Federal Reserve just creating more money. He's parroting the line that he wants us to hear. No news about that. Now, There's lots of things going on the internet if you haven't paid any attention to it. I just want to bring that to your attention that these are the 5 signs of a false flag terror attack. You may know, well, what's a false flag? Well, it's when the media uses horrific images to shock the public over and over, and when they have the police, the powers that be, have drills of a similar attack that occur in the same day in the same area, when eyewitness accounts don't match what the officials stand up and say, and when the conflicting evidence is not repeated in the media, so the mainstream media is shut down, and when it's used as an excuse to curtail rights or start a war. So you just need to be aware that those are the signs. Just go down the checklist. Did we see this? Did they do this? What about that? And when you talk about the Boston bombing, many of these things do seem to be true. So, for example, here's in Forbes magazine, the Senator Lindsey Graham wants to suspend the Constitution for the Boston Marathon suspect. And I have to remind you or let you know that there's a lot of conflict. A lot of people feel that these suspects were patsies, that they, it's really puzzling to me that the FBI now admits, it's been clear from the mother and other confirmation reports that the FBI knows these people. They've been interviewing these guys for, several years, talking to them, being involved with them, and yet they put their picture out asking for the public to identify them. So there's some real things that cause us puzzles. Now, we also talked about this being a distraction, so here's some news that made no news last week, so to speak. I didn't hear anything about him in mainstream media, and I don't read anything about him in my paper. So here's one thing. This is really interesting. This is a bank regulator. This is a lady that used to work, Amy Friend, used to work at the OCC, and now she was managing director of Promontory. Now remember that Promontory was the subcontractor that oversaw the independent foreclosure review. Okay, so she was managing director. Somewhere I read she was paid $1 million, probably more than that. But now she's rejoining the OCC. Isn't that sweet? So, as chief counsel. So she's recusing herself for a year from discussions because of the Volcker rule. The Volcker rule basically is an effort to say, okay, if you've been a lobbyist, you don't going through that revolving door thing, then for a year when you come back onto the government side, you have to recuse yourself from these issues. And of course, there are people, I'm scrolling down here to show you, a place that I want to talk. This is about these are people that say, wait a minute. Do you mean we can't get anybody else as chief counsel? We just have to have her? So here's Craig Holman, the government affairs lobbyist for Public Citizen, a Washington-based watchdog group, said Friend's situation is a very troubling abuse of the so-called revolving door between government and business. I don't know why they call it so-called. It is a revolving door between government and business. And Craig says it sounds like a whole lot of work trying to live by this sort of recusal arrangement. If the conflicts of interest are so common, she shouldn't be appointed. So it really begs the question, why did they pick her? She's in charge of the company that was the key entity in the independent foreclosure review. So it really, frankly, if you just step back and you look at it, you think, well, this is the reward. She now gets to regulate. It's back and forth, back and forth. Fascinating, isn't it? I'd love to be a fly on the wall in some of those discussions behind closed doors, wouldn't you? Here's some more news. Now the Secretary of the Treasury, Jake Lew, doesn't see any bubbles, and yet here it talks about, is the Federal Reserve insane? And the fact of the matter is, what the Federal Reserve always does are bubbles. And this article is written to say, Are they insane? Do they really expect, if they expect different results, then they have to stop doing what they've always been doing. And I would argue back and say, no, this is exactly what the Federal Reserve is planning to do. They are not insane. This is intentional. It's intentional boom and bust cycles. As you read down through the article, they talk, it didn't take long for the next boom and bust cycle. So why are they booming and busting? They're booming and busting because it's very profitable for them and it ruins you and me. And that is the point. So please share that. No news on that either. Oh, and here's something that was released last week. No news virtually other than the internet, no mainstream media that I'm aware of, about the report. This is a bipartisan, a 2-year independent investigation on torture. Actually comes out, it's a 577-page report, and states that the U.S. tortured detainees and top officials. Now, if you were a top official, you'd probably want no news on that either. You'd probably want to do something else over here to distract the public. It's like a magic trick. So that the public's looking over there while this comes out and gets no attention. So I've attached 2 links. This one, which actually down at the bottom, when I attached it last week, when I looked at it, did have the report itself, the full report. Now you can see that I can't bring up the full report. I don't know why. Hopefully, if you get the full report, I recommend that you do download it. I didn't download it. That was a big mistake. So I don't have that right now. Hopefully, we'll be able to get that full report, because it wouldn't surprise me that they try to keep that full report from being available to the public. So here's another one, another article about the bipartisan report. U.S. practiced widespread torture, has no justification, didn't yield significant information, and the nation's highest officials bear responsibility. And the thing I liked about this particular article is it just really highlighted the points. The luminaries on the panel, what the panel concluded, what they also found, that kind of thing, for your information. Now, what I really wanted to also mention is that I had no idea about this. This is fascinating, but evidently there was a Exxon oil spill cover-up. This is really great, and thank goodness for the people. It's the people that are going to break this news. We know this now, and we need to really understand it's up to us.
ExxonMobil, one of the most profitable companies in the world that regularly pays no U.S. income tax, had a pretty horrible tar sands oil spill in Arkansas last month. Most people have heard bits and pieces of the story, but here's what you probably haven't heard from the corporate media. First off, you got a glimpse of the pipeline rupture and spill because of citizen bloggers and journalists like Drew Barnes, who posted this on YouTube. But you haven't seen much coverage from the air of this, have you? That's because just like with the BP Halliburton blowout in the Gulf, the FAA imposed a no-fly zone over the oil spill. You are not allowed to see what's going on. ExxonMobil has even hired local police for security, and they're doing a pretty good job of keeping reporters away, according to Mother Jones reporting, that documented numerous instances of people being threatened with arrest for just trying to ask questions or take pictures on site. Second, with all the money and profits from that oil pipeline, ExxonMobil doesn't have to pay into the federal fund to clean up oil disasters, including this one. Why? Because this stuff isn't oil. It's stuff that the press refers to as tar sands oil from Canada, but it's actually legally known as diluted, in the United States we call it bitumen, in Britain bitumen. And according to a 1980 law pushed through and passed by our bought-off Congress, that stuff that comes from Canada, the diluted bitumen, not being oil, isn't subject to the tiny taxes that are imposed on regular oil to pay into a fund to help cover the costs of spills. Another reason why the diluted bitumen, aka tar sands oil, that'll be coming down the Keystone XL pipeline, will be even more profitable for the big companies who plan to refine it on the Texas coast and then ship that refined diesel and gasoline that they extract from it to England, Mexico, Brazil, and China, and other places. We, by the way, will get to keep all the poisons left over from the refining process. And we get to pay for all the cancers from them. I expect Cancer Alley down south to grow substantially. Finally, to add insult to industry, or to injury, we get one of the more heavily oil industry funded members of Congress, Oklahoma Republican Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen, who recently said this to us.
I think Exxon should be actually patted on the back for the way they handled this. Yes, it was horrible. Yes, we don't like to see it, but they handled it. They did a great job handling it.
And this clueless congressional newbie repeats the lie that the Keystone Pipeline, carrying more of this tar sands oil to the Gulf Coast, is, when it's finished, it'll reduce our dependence on Middle Eastern oil. Trying to tie the wonders of ExxonMobil to the bombing in Boston, this genius said, I mean, would we rather buy oil from the Middle East that sponsors the acts like we see at the marathon that we saw just yesterday? I guess the congressman got out ahead of John King and CNN in knowing who blew up the pressure cookers in Boston. But aside from that stupidity, pipeline will not reduce our dependence on foreign oil a bit, because all that slurry from Canada is going to very, very profitable refineries on the Gulf Coast, where they can then refine and export the refined gas and diesel overseas. Last year, this nation's #1 export was not TVs or jeans or computers. We invented all those things, but we don't make them here anymore. It was gasoline and diesel fuel. Yep, the big oil companies are exporting gas and diesel from the U.S. like crazy, keeping the prices for us here high and the profits for them even higher. And now they want to export even more. Oh, and by the way, let us keep the cancers and the oil spill risks and all that stuff coming out of the smokestacks. We've been scammed. From that 1980 law exempting the oil companies from paying into cleanup funds for Canadian tar sands oil, to blocking our press from covering their spills, to our members of Congress being bought and sold, we've been scammed. And all of this to keep alive a 19th century fuel system that's destroying our planet. It's time to leave behind fossil fuels altogether. Portugal just produced 70% of all their power needs from renewables. We can do that too. We are still the nation that put a man on the moon, that invented the transistor and the integrated circuit, that led the world for centuries. If we can just get the bought and paid for politicians out of the way and get our press to actually cover the horrors of tar sands oil and the reality of climate change, we just may be able to once again have that JFK vision of the city on the hill. We should even take a lesson from the dozens of nations that have nationalized their oil and, like Norway, use the money to send their kids to college. It's time to step up and speak out.
A couple of interesting comments on that. First off, he talks about the way we, you know, these people have already won, okay? So the way we can fight back is to change the game. Just don't use them anymore. Nationalize the oil. Now that is a really cool idea. Let's think about that, because obviously it's like, if you will, almost nationalizing the banks. We're saying we want to go to public banking. Well, let's go to public energy. Let's have the public benefit from these very lucrative but required entities. We need to have loans and credit and money swirling in the economy so that we can have an economy. We need energy. So let's take those things back as a people. Very interesting. And I really wanted you to hear that obviously they did a no-fly zone. They won't allow the public. They're talking, you know, it's truly the government doesn't want us to see what they're doing. So the more we keep exposing that and getting the media on our side, the better we'll be. That too. Now, I wanted to show you some other things that happened. These are still all the things that, you know, came up last week. No news. Now, the oil thing was actually last month. I just found out about it last, hunting around for, okay, what's happening that's not being told. So here's one. On Friday, at just before 5, Congress passed a rollback. Now, this article talks about the Stock Insider Trading Act that was passed back in November 2011. Huge expose about how all the Congress people get to, trade insider trading. So they trade on knowledge that they've got for their own personal benefit. I mean, it's outrageous. And the public's outraged. And so quickly, within months, they passed the Stock Act with overwhelming support to make insider trading laws that apply to everyone else finally apply to them and their staffers. So think about that. Even the staffers are exempt from insider trading. And of course, now what they did, late last week, I believe Friday afternoon, they rolled that law back, and they specifically rolled back the part that required staffers to post disclosures about their financial transactions. So now you can't find that easily. It's not a transparent database. You would have to know a specific person's name, and you'd have to go down into the basement where they keep these records, use a computer there, type in that name to see what they did, and there's like 28,000 staffers or something. So the point is, they rolled that back. And they did that with virtually no discussion. They voted it through with what they called unanimous consent. I didn't even know they had such a thing. So unanimous consent. See, here it is. It was such a national risk that Congress did the whole thing quietly with no debate. No debate. The bill, no reading, no 3 days, no nothing. The bill was introduced in the Senate on Thursday, quickly voted on late that night, Thursday night, when no one was paying attention. Friday afternoon, the best time to sneak through news. The House picked it up by unanimous consent. The House ignored its own promise to give Congress 3 days to read a bill before holding a vote, because this kind of thing is just too important to let anyone read the bill before Congress had to pass it. And of course, yesterday, Obama signs it into law. Ain't it sweet? Ain't it sweet? And then you wonder what's going on. There's no wonder anymore. This is a bunch of insiders doing what works for the insiders, and you and I are not insiders. We're outsiders. And we're looking in going, wait a minute, what's happening? Oh, here. Tomorrow is supposed to be the judgment on Doc X. It's been dragged on and postponed and postponed. And here is an article about what the U.S. government had to say about Doc X. And we know, you and I know, that they forged documents and they filed them as foreclosure on people's houses and took those houses with forged documents. And so the U.S. government says, we submit there is no actual or intended loss here. Actual loss means the reasonably foreseeable pecuniary harm that resulted from the offense. Intended loss means the pecuniary harm that was intended to result from the offense. She, meaning Lorraine Brown from Doc X, meant to perform and did perform the job she was hired to do. Her crime is that she allowed surrogate signers, rather than authorized signers, to sign the mortgage documents and to do so outside the presence of notaries. And nobody was really harmed. So you tell that to the, 8 million people now that have lost their homes, the 2 million that are looking at losing their homes, the 12 million that are going to lose their homes before this is over. You tell that to them and you say, oh, I'm sorry, there's no harm. There's no harm. Nothing. It's your own fault, even though the bank gets the free house and they forge the documents to take the houses. And of course, they've ruined the economy in the process. So let's move into the key story of today. Those were just the lead-ups. I saw this link. I watched the Senate Banking Committee overview, the video on, I believe, Friday, Saturday, and was just absolutely outraged. Now there's an article So I'm going to highlight, show you what it is, then I'm going to play the a couple of segments so that you can hear with your own ears. It's just classic to actually hear these people say these things. So the Senate subcommittee on housing, transportation, and community development, this is the banking committee's subcommittee, they held a hearing titled Helping Homeowners Harmed by Foreclosures, Ensuring Accountability and Transparency in Foreclosure Reviews, Part 2. They did this on Wednesday. And here is the key. This is what you're going to hear the people say. The settlement was to consist of $3.6 billion in cash, paying, those are the checks that bounced, to more than 4 million aggrieved borrowers. Now here they're saying, if they're saying basically that every foreclosure was aggrieved. Okay, so that's an implied admission that all the foreclosures were bad. They sent money to everybody. So, and another $5.7 billion in soft dollar assistance, such as loan mods, principal reduction, forgiveness of deficiency judgments. Yesterday's bombshell that the $5.7 billion may only amount to a paltry $12 million was captured in this exchange. This is what you're going to hear. Senator Merkley says, so in your testimony, Ms. Goldberg, I'm going to explain to you who she is. A wonderful advocate for the people. You note that on a loan with an unpaid balance of $500,000, a loan modification that provides any amount of principal reduction, be that $1,000, $10,000, or $100,000 for the owner, would yield $500,000 worth of credit for the servicer. It's hard for anyone apart from this process. It's hard for anyone. What do you mean apart from this process? It's hard for anyone to truly believe that if you do a $1,000 reduction for the owner, the servicer would get a $500,000 credit. And yet you're saying absolutely that's the way it works. And she says that's what's in the settlement. And then, of course, he points out, because he's done the math, that if you have the 5.76 billion round numbers in soft money at a 500 to 1 rate, they've reduced the $6 billion to $12 million principal reduction, and that they could go out and brag that they got a $6 million principal reduction. Do you see how they intend to manipulate what they're doing so that when they say things, it is not what you think they're saying? The definitions are incorrect. So let's say they reduce the 12 million. So they come out and they claim in the mainstream media that they reduced $5.7 billion in principal reduction. Clever. Very, very clever and very fraudulent. And the people need to rise up. Now, Ms. Goldberg, Deborah Goldberg, she's fabulous. She's from the NFHA, which is the National Fair Housing Alliance. And this is their homepage. I'm going to give that to you. I sent an email already to the CEO asking that we could connect with her. She didn't have an email on this website. And here is where you hear her. First, you hear her little presentation. I think it's really important because it's not just this fictitious accounting that she starts to expose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, what did I do? Mr. Chairman, Senator Merkley, thank you for inviting me here today to testify, and thank you too for your engagement in this issue. You have brought much needed attention and oversight to the independent foreclosure review process. The IFR is the only real federal effort to identify and compensate borrowers who were harmed by their mortgage servicers when their loans became unsustainable and they needed help to save their homes. While this and other programs seek to prevent future foreclosures, the IFR stands alone as an effort to begin to make borrowers whole. This is significant because of the harm caused by the foreclosure crisis. While foreclosures have affected virtually every community, certain communities have suffered more than others. During the heyday of subprime lending, communities of color were flooded with unsustainable subprime loans. Borrowers who should have gotten safer, cheaper prime loans were given subprime loans because they were more profitable. This happened to borrowers of color much more often than to white borrowers. Not surprisingly, These borrowers have suffered much higher rates of foreclosure, and they and their neighbors have lost tremendous wealth as a result. We hoped the IFR would begin to set things right, but from the beginning it's been plagued with a lack of transparency and accountability that has undermined its success. It has failed to identify borrowers who suffered harm, and in doing so to shed light on the nature and extent of the problems in mortgage servicing industry. Excuse me. It has not provided adequate compensation to borrowers, and to date, it has failed to bring about the kind of servicing reforms that are needed to prevent future unnecessary foreclosures. With the announcement of the new settlement in January, the IFR game has changed. With the rest of my time, I'd like to highlight some concerns with the settlement's $5.7 billion worth of non-cash assistance, and some ways in which the regulators can increase the positive impact of their consent orders. So this so-called soft dollar side of the IFR agreement is similar to the structure of the National Mortgage Settlement, or NMS. Unfortunately, the particulars differ from the NMS in three key ways that severely deflate the value and limit the impact of these soft dollars. First, it fails to make saving homes a priority. It places loan modifications, which can save homes, on an equal footing with short sales and deeds in lieu, which do not. Second, it gives the servicers credit based not on the amount of loan principal they forgive, but on the unpaid balance of the loan. This creates an incentive to modify loans with large balances because that's the fastest way for the servicers to get the most credit. It will likely mean that many fewer loans are modified than could have been the case. And third, this approach places borrowers of color and low and moderate income borrowers at a disadvantage because they tend to live in communities where home values and loan balances are smaller. Modifying their loans will put the servicers on a slower road to meeting their soft dollar goals. We are very disappointed that the settlement was structured this way, and we're concerned that many homes that could have been saved from foreclosure will be lost. However, there are two areas in which we believe the regulators can still make a positive impact in implementation of the IFR settlement. The first is the area of transparency. We have asked the regulators to make public detailed information about who's getting help as a result of this settlement, both through the direct cash payments and the non-cash assistance. These data must be broken out by servicer and by census tract so that the public can see whether the communities that have suffered the most are getting the assistance they need and deserve. The timely release of such information will help to hold the servicers accountable. It is also necessary to begin to rebuild public confidence in our regulatory system. The second is the area of oversight. Despite all of the servicing rules that have been written and all of the scrutiny to which servicers have been subject, mortgage servicing abuses remain all too common. They must be brought to an end so that the millions of homeowners still at risk of foreclosure can get the help they're supposed to get to save their homes. By stepping up their oversight and enforcement, the regulators can help accomplish this goal. Recently, the regulators have shown some interest in exploring these recommendations. I'm hopeful that they will do so and that they'll put them into action. But as long as problems persist in the mortgage servicing industry, we need you in Congress to keep up the pressure and continue your oversight. There are still some gaps in the servicing rules that must be closed, such as protections for people with limited proficiency in English, borrowers with disabilities, and the widows and heirs of deceased homeowners who can't get help from their servicers. We look forward to working with you and the regulators to address these problems. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
What a fabulous advocate. And I'm thinking, you can already probably find the Fair Housing Alliance website. I will have it linked, of course, in the comments. We need to connect with them. Maybe we could swamp them with all of this fraud and the problems that people are having, the foreclosure crisis, and the fact that the servicers are still doing all of this. They obviously know, but maybe individual cases and accounts just more and more would help them, give them more of a standing, a reason to get even more activated. And I'm also recommending that we contact the Senate Banking Committee members. I've already sent a letter to Menendez, but an email. I didn't send anything to the others. So let's consider connecting with everybody that's involved in this independent foreclosure review. This is a, so if you will, a weak spot in the servicers. They're talking about this outrageous settlement, and of course now the promontory key manager has gone over to be chief counsel over in the OCC. So you've got such a revolving door. We ought to just, be outraged about that. Make that stop. Anyway, you got to hear the people. You got to hear the senators.
No, I don't have an answer for that question. I wasn't involved
Ms.
in that.
Goldberg?
I'd like to correct one thing,
Great.
Senator Merkley, which
you.
is that when the independent reviews were stopped, the decision was made not to find harm, not to worry about finding harm. So the categories, as I understand it, the categories that borrowers were placed in for purposes of payments was based on how far along they had gotten in the loss mitigation process or the foreclosure process with their servicer. So the fact that a particular borrower was in a particular category wasn't a reflection of whether they were actually harmed, but just kind of what stage of the process they had gotten to.
I see.
But I think that your fundamental question is a very good one. If we know that the servicers made the mistakes to begin with, and we know that their systems were highly flawed, putting them in the position of slotting people into different categories seems unwise.
Ms. Goldberg, when this IFR was announced, we had a hearing to have it explained to us, and I raised the question on how is it that homeowners would feel confidence that their condition was going to be reviewed when they'd had so many frustrating experiences to date, and that the reviewers were being hired not by an independent strategy, but by the banks themselves, and that these reviewers weren't third party, that they had clear financial connections to the banks themselves. I think the fact that homeowners were promised a review and didn't get the review, just kind of, if you look at it from the street level, it seems like just one more farce. Is this far off the mark? That's a technical term, of course.
Well, I would say that the feedback that we hear is a lot of frustration and disappointment and confusion from borrowers on the street who I think don't have confidence that this process played out in a fair and even-handed manner.
I have more questions, but I'm over my time, so I'll kick it back to the chair.
We'll go through another round. Let me ask Ms. Goldberg, if the settlement provides around $5.5 billion in other forms of consumer mortgage-related relief, such as loan modifications and principal reductions. Some people refer to that as soft dollars. So I'd like to hear, to the extent that you know, more about how those soft dollars are being used to help borrowers, to keep borrowers in their homes, and how lenders are being credited under the IFR settlement for taking such actions. For example, if a borrower has a $200,000 mortgage and receives $20,000 in mortgage relief, how is that relief calculated under the IFR settlement? And are servicers doing all they can to keep homeowners in their homes? And I'd like to get a sense from Mr. Smith from the National Mortgage Settlement, how are those soft dollars calculated for that purpose under your settlement? And can you explain how each category is credited? So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as this process has not actually started yet, at least to the best of my belief, and I'm not sure what the launch date will be, but we'll get hopefully more information as time goes by. But in terms of the way it's structured, what we know is that there are some specified categories of activity for which the servicers will get dollar for dollar credit. So that includes principal reduction, loan modifications with principal reduction on first liens and second liens, short sales, and deeds in lieu of foreclosure. So for those four categories of activity, they'll get dollar for dollar credit. So that's a difference from the National Mortgage Settlement, and Mr. Smith can explain those details much more accurately than I. And in addition, another difference from the National Mortgage Settlement is that rather than getting credit for the amount, so take a loan modification, the amount by which the principal is reduced, the $20,000 in your example, servicers will get credit for the full unpaid principal balance of that loan, or the $200,000 in your example. So the borrower is still going to owe $180,000, and presumably with a loan modification will be able to repay that $180,000. And the $20,000 is really the benefit that they've experienced, but the servicer is going to get credit for the entire $200,000.
What's the public policy idea behind that?
I cannot answer that question. I cannot answer that question. I think, it raises a lot of very serious concerns, some of which I mentioned in my testimony. And for us, one of the key ones is
I can get 10 times my investment of write-off. I'd like to have that opportunity.
Right. And it certainly would encourage you, if you were the servicer, to do the biggest loans, work on the biggest loans that you can, because that's going to be the fastest route to meeting your goal, whatever that might be, for your soft dollar credits. The downside of that is that, the communities that we know experience the most harm, low and moderate income communities and communities of color, where housing prices are lower and therefore loan balances are lower, it's going to take more of those loans to get to the same soft dollar goal, and the chances are too big in our estimation that those loans will be put aside. That's not where the priority will be focused, and instead it'll be the higher income, higher balance loans that will get the first cut at the help.
That's a real concern. That's a real concern. Mr. Smith, how does it work under yours?
Very well. Under the National Mortgage Settlement, there are certain categories of relief that are required to be not less than a certain percentage of total relief. And I'd like to exclude for a moment, only because it's somewhat separate. Refinancing assistance is also required in each of the settlements, a specific dollar amount based on, there is a formula there, but it's essentially a multiplier based on yearly interest savings given, multiplied by a multiplier reflecting the remaining maturity of the loan. So that's the principal forgivenesses must comprise 60% of the total relief, soft dollar relief credited otherwise. And I'd like to emphasize credited, because this is important. So for example, and half of that 60% has to be first lien principal forgiveness. Now, somewhat to Senator Marcus' point before, if a bank is a servicer and owner of a loan and forgives, and the loan has less than a 175% loan to value, I'm going to simplify this slightly, but I mean, it's less than 175% LTV, owned and serviced. If let's say $45,000 is written down, $45,000 of credit is given. So the amount of relief and the credited amount are the same. If on the other hand, a bank has originated a loan, is still servicing it, sells it into a securitization, to get $45,000 of credit, it has to write down $100,000. In other words, it's 45 cents on the dollar. So that the thought, again, was that the theory, as I understand, was there was a concern about servicers getting credit for loans not owned by them. And so at the very least, what the settlement does is to give less credit for that in that circumstance. There's a different crediting for more than 175%. Second liens, which have been discussed, forgiveness of a loan that's less than 90 days past due, or not 90 days delinquent, which is different. Delinquent is 90 cents on the dollar. 91 to 179 days is 50 cents on the dollar, and as I was saying before, 180 days or more past due is 10 cents on the dollar. So again, the amounts credited have to be 60% of the credited relief has to be principal forgiveness, and half of that at least has to be first lien principal. In the case of ResCap, which we just did, actually it was more than 50% was first lien forgiveness as a total.
Well, that appears to be a far more equitable process than.
And it goes. I could go on, but it's pages. But I mean, for each category of relief, I do think you can argue about the price. You can argue about the number of cents on the dollar. I do think the settlement attempts to give credit that mirrors the benefit to the borrower roughly in a pretty good way.
And that should, in my mind, be the principle.
And if I could add one thing, Senator, one other difference is, so Mr. Smith talked about the 60% of the credits under the National Mortgage Settlement have to be for principal reduction on first liens, right? That's what you said.
Well, on total, 30% has to be.
Okay. There is no kind of limits like that under the IFR settlement. So it would be possible for a servicer to meet their entire goal by doing short sales and deeds in lieu, and be within, bounds of the settlement as it's written.
And that wouldn't necessarily maximize the goal of keeping people in their home.
It would not.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to continue on this same issue. In your testimony, Ms. Goldberg, on page 10, you note that on a loan with an unpaid balance of $500,000, a loan modification that provides any amount of principal reduction, be that $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000, yields $500,000 worth of credit for the servicers. It's hard for anyone apart from this process to truly believe that if you do a $1,000 reduction, you get $500,000 of credit. Yet, are you saying absolutely that's the way it works?
That's what it says in the settlement. I have to say, Senator, that when I first read the settlement, I didn't pick that up because it was so hard for me to believe it could be structured that way as well. But in fact, that is the wording of the settlement.
Mr. Holland, is this accurate to your knowledge?
I have no knowledge of the way the settlement was written. In our role, we have the administrative back office tasks at hand, mailing, phone calls.
But you've heard this issue. You haven't found anything that contradicts what Ms. Goldberg has said?
No.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to point out that the roughly $6 billion of soft money that's in this settlement, at that 500 to 1 rate, that is reduced down to $12 million. $6 billion goes to $12 million. That's a vast difference. Now, you've pointed out, Ms. Goldberg, that this creates a pure incentive to do reductions on large loans. Now, I live in a working class neighborhood, 3-bedroom ranch houses. There are no $500,000 mortgages where I live, because there's no $500,000 houses. So your point in your testimony is that working class communities, and certainly communities of color, are essentially, there's an incentive to kind of bypass them. Why would the Fed and the OCC agree to a structure that allows a 500 to 1 or more? For that matter, it could have been $1 under the argument you're making rather than 1,000. Why would they agree to such a fictitious form of accounting and a structure that incentivizes the bypassing of working Americans in this whole process?
I think that's an excellent question, Senator Merkley. I'm afraid I can't answer it. It would be a good question to ask them to explain.
Has anyone at the OCC or Fed given a rational explanation of what they were possibly thinking?
At one point I heard one person say that they believed that this structure accurately reflected the value of the assistance that the borrower received. That's the only explanation that I've heard, and it's not one that I find credible.
Well, I'm not sure how a borrower who gets $1,000 relief would feel they had gotten $500,000 of
right.
relief. Well, and our working class neighborhoods have been hit so hard, and in our communities of color where folks might have been more recent homeowners and had less equity, they weren't in a case of losing a share of their equity. They were losing their entire house. And that brings us to the third point you've raised, which is that essentially there's no emphasis on saving the family, that a short sale gets the same value as preventing a foreclosure. Why would a settlement intended and publicized to help the homeowner put the same weight on a situation where a family loses a home as on a situation when a family is able to keep their home?
It's another excellent question to which I don't have an answer. And it's really because of those flaws, which we view as being extremely serious and severely undermining the potential benefit of this settlement, that it's a done deal, right? The ink has dried on these settlements, and I don't have this sense that there's any desire on the part of either the regulators or the servicers to go back and renegotiate them. And so for us, that means it's really important to try and think about the places where something good can be rescued from this. And we see the two avenues to that being putting detailed information about who is getting help out there in the public arena, doing it regularly and in a timely fashion so that all of us can see who is and isn't getting help, and help to shape that a little bit.
You're asking for data on a census tract basis so
That's
this
right.
can truly be evaluated, which is transparency and accountability.
That's right.
Is that guaranteed now, or does that require some future decision, and where would that decision-making power lie?
So as I understand it, and I think as that's actually reflected in the settlement itself, the servicers are required to report on a 45-day schedule to the regulators. I believe that they're still in the process of deciding which information that they will ask servicers to collect and report. And they have told us they are prepared to put some data out there in the public arena, but we don't know yet exactly what that will look like or how often that will be made available to the public, you know, when and how often.
Mr. Chairman, I would be interested in pursuing this in partnership with you, that we should ask for such data to be part of this process for at least evaluation, looking back at what worked and what didn't. Thank you.
I agree. And let's participate with these guys, and let's tell them we support this, and let's try to tell our local news people and the mainstream media that this is the natural and logical thing that normal thinking people would do, and that is transparency. Let's push for that. And I do see that we've got people in Congress that are evidently really just starting to learn what we've been talking about now for over a year, and that is this thing is completely out of control. We need to stop it. So that was for your information. I thought it was very important that you hear these kinds of things actually being said so that we can connect with these kinds of people and understand who's doing what and what kind of suggestions are coming out of like this committee hearing. Now, that's an awful lot of news. And before we go today, you just got to hear about aquaponics. I just learned about it last week. Here is the Wikipedia. It's basically a sustainable food production system that combines aquaculture, raising aquatic animals like snails, fish, crayfish, prawns in tanks, with hydroponics, raising plants. And here's a quick little, you can review that yourself. Here's a quick little diagram I found on a cool little website about how it works. You got the fish tank with the air pump, and then, you know, it pumps the waters into the plants, settles out, goes back to the fish. It cycles the water, and you grow both the fish and the plant at the same time. Here's a really cool little video about it, and a gentleman happens to be here in Sonoma County that's really making a difference. Great ideas. Let's see what we can do for our neighborhoods. Let's see if I can get this to run. I'll try it one more time. Well, that one doesn't seem like it wants to go. Let's try this one.
Hi, my name is Max Myers, and this is a project here at the Ukiah High School that we're doing through the work that we provide at the Mendocino Ecological Learning Center and my business, NorCal Aquaponics. Well, aquaponics is a fusion of farming fish, which we call aquaculture, the farming of fish, and hydroponics, which is growing plants without soil. And the idea is that the fish do their business in the water, they produce plenty of waste, and that wastewater is pumped out to the crops. And the crops filter that water, they take that nutrient source out of the water, which is fish waste. To a plant, fish waste is delicious. So the plants use that as a nutritious fertilizer source, and they, in the process, they filter the water, and then the clean water returns to the fish, providing them with clean water and providing the plants with nutrients that they need. So it's a beautiful system that provides everything for the system within the system. And the idea of the greenhouse here is that in this part of the world we need to have a stable climate, because the fastest production you're going to get from both the crops and the fish is in a stable environment. So here we're trying to mimic a subtropical temperature of about 78 degrees. In this greenhouse we're going to be raising tilapia fish, and tilapia fish can reach a size of 1 pound in 6 months. So the idea here is to have the maximum production possible, so we're going to have a heated greenhouse. And what I love so much about this system and what makes my work at NorCal Aquaponics unique is that this model is going to be as sustainable as possible. And what I mean by that is it's going to be powered by solar energy, it's going to have solar hot water to help heat it, and then it's going to use all of the fish waste coming out of the system to produce methane gas, which is another form of natural gas. And then that natural gas is going to be used to create additional heat and additional electricity for the system. I feel really honored to be here and be a part of this project. As you can see, we got a lot going on here today. The idea here is to create an educational model for the students that both produces a large amount of food in the most sustainable means possible. In addition to providing the students with an educational model, this system is also going to be a student-run business, which will provide employment opportunities for the kids here at Ukiah High School who will manage the system as well as sell the produce. Produce coming out of the system is going to be in the form of fish, prawns, and mixed deluxe salad greens, and the kids are going to be doing that as a business in a CSA-type model. That's a community-supported agriculture system. Future Farmers of America has a wonderful presence here at the high school, and the Future Farmers of America, as well as the 4-H Club, has taken a particular interest in this project. So those students are going to be going around approaching local businesses and getting donations from them, what we call in the CSA world a subscription farming system. So they're going to be getting subscriptions of dollar amounts, and in exchange for those dollar amounts, the local businesses will receive a given amount of food for that given year. Mendocino Ecological Learning Center and NorCal Aquaponics are both located in Willits, California, which is only about 20 miles from here. And the other one being is that I really wanted to work with a high school, particularly a public high school. If I had this kind of a program when I was in high school, I would have been into organic farming and sustainability a lot sooner than I am now. And I think that now more than ever it's important to have green businesses and green technologies available to the students, and what better model to do it than at a public high school. The project is still underfunded, so anyone with some available money to donate to a worthy project at a high school so that kids in the future generations can continue to benefit from the system we're building here, it would be incredibly beneficial to us.
How can they get the money to you?
Well, there's a website set up that features the work that we're doing here at the project. It's called NorCal Aquaponics. That's norcalaquaponics.com, and there you can donate directly to the high school project, or you can sign up on a volunteer list and come donate your time here.
What a cool idea. Let's connect with our high schools. You got a high school where you live. You can contact them and the FHA, the Future Farmers of America, FFA. Get involved. Have them get involved. I love this concept. Getting the kids into green. The things that we can do. We need to change the game. See you tomorrow.
When I was a lass, I was proud of me class, like my father and mother before me. They taught me to fight for my civil rights, but it's always the same old story. The rich reign supreme while the poor can but dream, under Labour or Liberal or Tory. And I say, bugger the bankers and politicians, bugger the bureaucrats too, bugger the buggers who make up the rules, and if you're one of them, bugger you, and if you're one of them, bugger
The system is bent and the money's all spent. We're badgered from every direction. The workers get taxed while the wealthy relax.
with nary a moment's reflection. Where there's brass, there's muck, and they don't give an arse, 'cause we're programmed against insurrection. And I say, bugger the bankers and politicians, bugger the bureaucrats too, the struggle for justice. But I've done my time on the protesters' line, and these days I show my dissent by loitering